This is called the Bad Faith Podcast. I didn't assume that that would be literal. Let's talk about Briahna Joy Gray. So Briahna Joy Gray is the former press secretary for former presidential candidate and senator from Vermont, Bernie Sanders, a person that I know a lot of people in my community is, got into politics because of Bernie. Bernie was a big part of me getting into politics and taking the issues in my life and applying them to politics and understanding the connections through the issues that I faced in my life growing up with my mom's drug addiction and homelessness, stuff like that, and those problems being solvable through political action. Bernie was like a big part of that. And I know he is for a lot of you guys, you know? A lot of you guys really, really like Bernie. And Briahna Joy Gray was his press secretary and is now the host of the Bad Faith Podcast, which used to be co-hosted by Virgil Texas before Virgil Texas just disappeared off the face of the earth with really no comment whatsoever from Briahna Joy Gray, because Virgil Texas was accused by a minor of engaging in like sexual communications with them in some way. I don't want to do a huge deep dive on that right now. Just know Virgil Texas is basically out of the picture for all we know. The big meme is, where's Virgil? Where's Virgil? We have no clue. Anyway, Briahna Joy Gray has on a lot of guests on her show, and recently she had a person on the show who's very supportive of Ukraine. And this person was talking to her about the type of actions that the Russian government has committed in Ukraine, you know, torture, the mass graves, and particularly the kidnapping of Ukrainian children. This is not covered often, although a lot of people cover the grain being looted and the mass graves, Bucha, the mass grave uncovered in Lyman, the biggest mass grave uncovered since the Yugoslav genocide in the city of Izium of 447 bodies, you know, the bombing of hospitals, apartment blocks. But the kidnapping of Ukrainian children, of them being taken, put through filtration camps, and then sent to Russia after the Russian government either killed their parents or just found them and just took them. That is not covered as much. It's extremely horrific what's going on, but it's not covered as much. And so this person brings that to the attention of Briahna Joy Gray. And says, you know, they're stealing Ukrainian children. 500 just yesterday were shipped to Russia. And this is why we should be supporting Ukraine. We cannot allow this kind of evil to go unchecked. Don't you agree with me on that? And she says, I'm sorry I don't, and here's why. Let's listen to what she has to say here.
They're stealing Ukrainian children. 500 just yesterday were shipped to Russia. And this is why we should be supporting them. We cannot allow this kind of evil to go unchecked, just on a basic moral reason. I mean, don't you agree with that?
I'm sorry, I don't. And here's why.
Why?
I gotta say, the eye roll came off as incredibly tone deaf. I mean, incredibly. I think the eye roll came off really, really bad as he's like talking about these Ukrainian children being like kidnapped, and she's like giving an eye roll to that. And obviously I have a lot of connection personally to this conflict because of my friends who are in Ukraine that I know very well and that are like, you know, a big part of my life. And I've been there, I've met people who have been very affected. So obviously that rubs me the wrong way a lot. There's not really a political criticism here besides it just came off as very callous. Just there's a comment there, but let's see why she disagrees that they should do something.
Sorry, I don't. And here's why.
Why?
There are gangs that have overtaken Haiti. There is a cholera pandemic that was started by the UN. UN members raped Haitians. A third of Pakistan was underwater.
She says UN members raped Haitians. I think what she's referring to is the story that UN soldiers, while in Haiti on a humanitarian mission, engaged in a lot of sexual abuse with locals. And it was a massive, massive scandal. And a lot of them actually got Haitian women pregnant and then just like fled the country, just like left. Very, very terrible thing that happened.
Should we go, due to the climate crisis, should we go and invade China because Uyghurs are in concentration camps? Tell me, articulate. And this is the question that I asked Matt Duss when this war first started.
Matt Duss is like Bernie Sanders' foreign policy advisor.
Until you can articulate to me what the rationale is behind where America intervenes and where it doesn't, and give me some kind of moral accounting that makes me believe that it's actually about moral commitment and realizing how much of our money and our resources in the richest country in the world can go to saving lives and increasing the quality of life for the most people, as opposed to a strategic military intervention for territory, resources, and political control. If you can articulate to me why this is truly the most deserving humanitarian case on the planet, as opposed to a continuation of these Cold War policies, we want our economic system, our oppressive, by the way, economic system to maintain global dominance, then I can start to entertain a conversation about what our intervention should be, how long, and how much. But there is nowhere in the entire public sphere that that conversation is actually happening, and nowhere close to a rationalization that's been presented.
Okay, so there is a lot here. And this is called the Bad Faith Podcast. I didn't assume that would be literal. I didn't assume that would be a literal name. I'd be willing to discuss any of these things with Briahna in the future if she ever wanted to have me on. I don't know if she would have any interest in having me on anyway. I'm not an extremely influential person. But we can go through these points one by one. So she goes through a bunch of crises that are going over, or issues in the world, and saying why isn't America doing this? Why isn't America doing this?
Uyghurs are in concentration.
Should we go invade China because Uyghurs are in concentration camps? So obviously, the United States cannot solve every issue in the world. And we do, to a degree, as Americans, have to pick and choose what conflicts we get involved in part because we just don't have the resources to fix every issue in the world, even if we're the wealthiest nation on the planet. And that puts us in a unique position, a very unique position compared to all other countries on the amount of power influence we have. Not only because we have the most powerful military, but we also have the world's strongest economy, and we have the global reserve currency. So we're in a unique position that, say, the Netherlands and Central Africa and South Africa and Guatemala and Canada and Mexico and Norway and Bhutan and Nepal, we're in a very specific position that no other country in the world is in. We're the most powerful country on the planet, no holds barred, no questions. Nobody denies that. And because we're the most powerful country, both economically and militarily, there are some problems that only we can solve because of the position we're in. Now, the rapes that occurred because of the UN in Haiti, that was absolutely god-awful, right? Many of the issues she puts out here are very god-awful issues. But when she says, should we go and invade China because Uyghurs are in concentration camps, I cannot read this in any other way besides this is a bad faith question, because she knows the difference between sending weapons to Ukraine and American boots on the ground in Beijing trying to take Chinese territory to stop the Uyghurs from being persecuted. Obviously, what's going on in Xinjiang is a human rights atrocity when it comes to the cameras and the monitoring of Muslim minorities, when it comes to discrimination against them because of their religious practices, when it comes to the internment. All of these things are god-awful. But China is a nuclear power, and we cannot invade and start trying to take territory or liberating territory from a nuclear power. We have tried to respond to what happened with the Uyghurs. We put in place sanctions specifically on the Chinese government officials who are most deeply involved with the large-scale internment of Uyghur Muslims. So we have had some response. We did do something. Is it enough to stop it? No. I think China's a lot more, I would say, jumpy on the issue of the international community's response to Uyghur Muslims, because they've gotten so much international scrutiny because of the sanctions, because of the international monitors, because of the NGOs' outcries. But obviously we didn't solve the issue. But an invasion is just not a practical solution. And she knows an invasion is not a practical solution because China is a nuclear power. We can't do everything at once, both because it's not within our means, like an invasion of China, and we don't have all of the world's resources at our disposal because we're one country or a coalition of countries, in reference to NATO, for example. So when it comes to what should America do in all these situations, my response is America should do what it can. You know, sometimes you just don't have the means to do everything. We don't have the means to fix every crisis on the planet. But we are in a unique position to help Ukraine. Ukraine needs something. Well, Ukraine needs a lot of things. It needs financial aid, it needs humanitarian aid, but it also needs weapons. Weapons that it is using to beat back the person, the country that is invading it and is occupying its territory, that is filling up these mass graves, which are kidnapping their children, which are raping women and raping children, that are engaged in endless atrocities and really the erasure of Ukrainian culture, as they take Ukrainian books and burn them in burn pits and remove all symbols of Ukrainian life and start taking down Ukrainian music and arresting people for playing Ukrainian music. There is really only one immediate solution for this, and that is to enable the Ukrainians with the tools necessary to liberate themselves, because the Russians seem hell-bent, and I will say they seem hell-bent on either taking large swaths of Ukrainian territory or completely subjecting the Ukrainian nation, as in overthrowing the government and installing Yanukovych, Putin's puppet. Neither of these outcomes are optimal. Both of these outcomes will lead to horrific outcomes for the Ukrainian people. And so they need a means to liberate themselves. And we are the nation that is in a unique position to help them. We have the most powerful military in the world. We have large swaths of American intelligence. We have ammunition. We have vehicles. We have drones. We have guns. We have artillery guns. We have artillery shells. We have rockets. We have shoulder-mounted munitions and weapons like javelins. The British have NLAWs, and the other European nations get involved as well. But we are in a unique position to give Ukraine the tools necessary to liberate itself. We are not in a unique position to liberate the Uyghur Muslims with an invasion of China. That's the difference. The difference is one thing is possible, the other thing isn't possible. That's the difference between a invasion of China to liberate the Uyghurs and sending guns to Ukraine so they can complete the liberation struggle. Not to mention, there is also a massive difference between American troops on the ground fighting tooth and nail, American coffins coming back home under the flag of the United States, and us sending weapons. There is a massive difference between these two things. Massive difference. Because one leads to coffins coming back to America and one doesn't. And so I think a lot of Americans do think there's a massive distinction between invading China and sending weapons to Ukraine. Not to mention, the nuclear threat when it comes to invading China is much higher than the nuclear threat that comes with sending weapons to Ukraine. I've already talked at length in many other videos and many other streams about exactly why the nuclear threat in Ukraine is really relatively quite low. If any of you guys wanted to check out those videos on your own time, you're free to do that. But I think that would be the big distinction, is that Ukraine we're in a unique position to help Ukraine. We're not in a unique position to invade China. That would be the main difference. I will say that I do think America should be involved in more things when it comes to, for instance, the liberation of Western Sahara. We should not be throwing Western Sahara under the bus for Israel. There are going to be a million different conflicts where I say, hey, we should not be assisting the Saudis in Yemen. But you can acknowledge that America is doing bad things in many places of the world, and also say America should be doing good things. Because if you don't acknowledge that, the only outcome you can land at realistically is America should do nothing. America should be isolationist. It should close itself out to the world and see genocides and rapes and murders and nuclear threats and terrorism. And its only reaction should be, and this is the pinnacle of human development, is not my problem. Those are foreigners. Wouldn't that be a pitiful end to humanity? When historians look back, aliens come to Earth and say, well, humans were developing for a while, but eventually they got to the conclusion that genocides just kind of happened, and never again was kind of like a vague platitude we didn't actually need to follow. That would be a horrific thing for humanity. Something I am also not willing to accept as a human being, is that the end of human development is we just let genocides happen. It's not our business. It's not our business. They're foreigners, they're Ukrainians, and you know we've done some bad things before, and other bad things are happening. And so we either have to fix all of the problems in the world, or we fix none of the problems of the world. I think this is a false dichotomy. I think it is a false dichotomy. We do what we can. We do what we can. And that's all anyone could do. Obviously, on a personal level, there's many issues in the world that I want to help with. Hunger, homelessness, drug abuse. But I'm only one man. So I do what I can. I help at my local soup kitchen. I give to charitable organizations when I can, as I assume many of the people watching do. And sometimes I'm really torn up at the fact, and I do mean this, I'm really torn up at the fact that I can't do more. I have had instances where I've actually cried at the fact that I don't think I'm doing enough to help Ukraine. And I've given a tremendous amount of my own money to charity. I've gone to Ukraine. I've helped with aid deliveries. I've done this stuff, but I always have felt like I wish I could do more. But I'm happy that I have that feeling about myself, because it means that there's more to strive towards and there's more to do. So really, at the end of the day, all you can ever ask is that a nation state does what it can. Not what it is impossible for it to accomplish, but what it can. Invading China to free the Uyghurs is an impossible goal. Putting sanctions upon those who help with internment is something we did do and is an attainable goal. We can attain weapon shipments to Ukraine in order to liberate itself. We can obtain American troops landing in Moscow to overthrow Putin to save Russian homosexuals, right? We can't. We can't. My goodness. What are some other points that she makes here? Oh yes, strategic. Strategic. That the reason that we're involved in Ukraine is for strategic reasons. So I've said this on many times. Do you support the blockade of Cuba? No, I don't support the blockade of Cuba. Now, I've said this on many times. And I have to say it many more times, because this discussion continues. And she says that we don't have this discussion, but we have this discussion quite frequently. We have this discussion really quite a lot here on this channel, and when I see discussion about Ukraine online. And so I think there is a little bit of oh, woe is me, we need to have the conversation. We need to have the conversation. Because I feel like that's something people usually say when they don't have an argument, but they want to have an argument, so they just say we should have the conversation, So when it comes to the idea of well, what if America is supporting Ukraine for selfish reasons? Now, I would say that America is supporting Ukraine for a whole host of reasons. I think a large portion of it, and people can disagree with me if they want, is because the American public largely supports Ukraine. There's a reason why there's so many CNN mainstream news stories about supporting Ukraine, but there's not many about supporting the Saudis in Yemen. And it's because the Americans don't really care about helping the Saudis in Yemen. It's not a moral war. It's not a war the Americans, we sympathize with the Saudi-backed government in Yemen. They're the true, nobody feels that in the United States, but they do feel that sympathy for the Ukrainian government, because it is a democracy that's defending itself from an authoritarian invader that wishes to erase its culture, commit endless war crimes in the pursuit of rebuilding a vast empire from history. It's a very easy thing to look at and sympathize with the Ukrainian population and sympathize with the Ukrainian people as the Russians are kidnapping Ukrainian children and sending them back to Russia, as this man brought up and she rolled her eyes at. It's very easy. I think it has a lot of support from the American people, and that's why aid to Ukraine has largely been bipartisan, and why the American newscasters, even though it doesn't cover Ukraine enough, has covered Ukraine more than the average war, even though we don't even have soldiers on the ground covering it. We were in war in Afghanistan for 20 years, and we've been covering the war in Ukraine more than we covered the war in Afghanistan in the last 5 years combined. And it's because it's much easier to sympathize with the Ukrainian government, because it's on the right side of history here, than it was to sympathize with the insanely corrupt ANA led by incompetent people and not supported enough by Afghans. There were Afghans who supported the ANA. There were Afghans who supported the ANA government over the Taliban. The Taliban's actually not that popular, but it wasn't enough. And that's why the Ukrainian government survived where the ANA government didn't. And so I think a lot of it is because Americans want their money to go towards this moral struggle, and they don't want their money to go finance the Russian economy, which will then be used to build guns and bombs and planes that will ram against Ukrainian civilians and kill them. So I think that's part of it, but it is true that some of it is strategic, of course. Part of it is strategic between Moscow and Washington, D.C. Is part of it going to be resources? It's hard to say how much of it is. I mean, you could just say, well, it would be beneficial for the West if they had Ukraine in its sphere of influence because it has resources and economics. I mean, I guess that's true. We have no reason to indicate from like secret government documents or anything that's leaked that that is a major motivating factor. It seems a lot of it could be power balancing in Europe. The idea that, hey, if Ukraine joined NATO, NATO would be more powerful and Russia would be in a worse strategic position to invade other countries in the future or to invade Ukraine in the future. And somebody could easily say, okay, and we don't want Russia to invade Ukraine in the future. We also don't want Russia to invade Moldova, which is a question mark for many people as another state that is not within NATO. We don't want Russia to invade Georgia again. We don't want Russia to invade Finland or Sweden or any of these countries, or Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Poland, any of these countries. But even if it is for selfish power balancing reasons, and you don't agree that NATO should expand into Ukraine, putting Ukraine in a permanent defensive sphere that will make it impossible for the Russians to invade it, therefore putting a permanent end to this war, even if you don't think that is the case, let's say it is selfish. And if someone came up to me when I was trying to fight, let's say I was in Algeria and I was fighting the Algerian independence struggle against French colonialism, right? A righteous struggle. I don't think anybody here is going to argue against the Algerian independence struggle or argue for French colonialism. Could anybody seriously try to suggest to me that if a weapons dealer went to Algerian rebels and said, we are going to sell you some guns that you can use, that we should go and try to stop the weapons dealer? The weapons dealer isn't there for moral reasons of struggles and freedom. Not all the time. There are weapons dealers who have political motivations for moving weapons around, weapons smugglers especially. But should we stop a weapons dealer if their motive is profit, if they're benefiting a righteous cause? We have worked with many people who have ulterior motives and bad ideas about how the world should go, even. Just like, I would even say we've worked with bad people towards a better cause and bad governments towards a better cause. Joseph Stalin in the Soviet Union is a great example of that. But the Nazis were a bigger threat. And so we worked with the Soviets, not only by joining the war, but we sent them trucks and food and aid for years before we entered the conflict. Why? Could it be partially for selfish reasons? In some way, probably. But should the Soviets turn to us and say, "Niet, in the struggle for survival, we will not take your support"? It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Of course, we should have sent support, even if we're involved in a war for semi-selfish reasons. Are we all going to pretend that all of the reasons the United States got involved for World War II were righteous and holy reasons? No. No, there were many good reasons. We were attacked. It's perfectly moral for a state to respond to Pearl Harbor in the way that we did and fighting back in that way. We were fighting the Japanese, which were hosting an evil empire in Asia. We're fighting the Nazis. We're fighting the Italians. All negative opponents that needed to lose the war. But undoubtedly, weapons manufacturers did make money out of the Second World War. And I'm sure many of them were pleased at us entering the war. Many of them wanted us to enter the war. Not for moral reasons, not for righteous reasons of, oh, we shall destroy fascism, but for the reasons of profit, for the reasons of making money. Does that mean we don't enter the war? The things that lead to nations joining one side or another side in the conflict, that led to the capitalist United States and the communist Soviet Union both fighting against the Nazis are complicated and intertwined to the point it is actually very difficult to weigh exactly how much certain motivations push nations to war. But what I do know is that the United States joining the Second World War was good. It was good, even if there are selfish reasons involved on top of the moral reasons we got involved. It was good. The Nazis needed to lose. The Nazis needed to be wiped off the face of the earth. And if we understand that, why is it hard to understand that us sending weapons to Ukraine, even if it is almost undoubtedly, at least partially, motivated by personal selfish reasons, either because of Ukrainian natural resources, or if NATO's stronger, then we're stronger by extension. Even if that's the case, the Ukrainians are the moral side in this conflict, and it is good for us to be on the right side. It's not that complicated, really. It's good to be on the correct side. It's not really that much more complicated than that. And so there's probably many motivators getting America involved in the war. And the thing is, I don't think the United States is acting morally on the world stage in many, many, many ways. Yemen, Western Sahara, I could go on. We're not strong enough when it comes to the Tatmadaw in Myanmar. I think we should be more involved in supporting the rebels against the military junta. But that doesn't mean that when America either stumbles into or deliberately walks into the correct position, that we just reject it out of, we're either right on everything or we're wrong on everything. There's no middle ground. It almost feels like Puritan in a way. Anyway, I'm really disappointed by her response here, because she should know the massive difference between invading China and sending weapons to Ukraine. Anyway, that's enough of the original video, but she kept going because people did not take well to her eye roll and the way she carried herself in the conversation. And so, people have responded the banality of evil right down to the eye roll. And she responded with an eye roll. Somebody else said, forcibly transferring children out of a group is an internationally recognized form of genocide. She is arguing we should not do anything about a genocide. And then she says, no, I'm asking why we should trust that America's interest in Ukraine is humanitarian, given how frequently ignores or causes humanitarian crises. Also, given the State Department statement, the goal is to weaken Russia. Well, I would say, if you weaken a state that is set on invading its neighbors, then it can't invade its neighbors anymore. I would bring up the Gulf War as an example of that. And I think that's a lot where that statement came from. But extending past that, she does not want to support Ukraine. It sounds like from this clip, she doesn't want to support Ukraine. She says, before I even entertain the idea we should support Ukraine, before I even entertain the idea we should give them our money, because it's our money, by the way, I need to have these questions answered. It did sound like she was saying no. You can't have your cake and eat it too. You either want to send weapons to Ukraine or you don't want to send weapons to Ukraine, right? You either want to send weapons to Ukraine or you don't want to send weapons to Ukraine. As far as I'm aware, Briahna Joy Gray does not want to send weapons to the victim here. She does not want to put the knife in the hand of the rape victim to defend against the rapist. She does not want to give weapons to the victim so they can use it against the perpetrator of this assault, the perpetrator of this invasion. You can't make a 2-minute argument as to why America's not a moral actor and there's so many other issues we should be involved in, and this is all selfishness, and then be like, what do you mean? What do you mean I don't want to send weapons? I didn't say I didn't want to send weapons to stop a genocide. I just made all the arguments as to why we shouldn't send weapons to stop a genocide. It feels kind of fence city and a thing where she's already clearly taken a position. The correct position is that USA supports its interests. American interests can be morally good or morally bad. I mean, that's like the most like blunt way of putting it, but yeah. I believe in a morally conscious United States. I believe in the idea of changing our foreign policy and even compromising sometimes when it comes to strategic interests in order to take a moral stance, because I think in the long term, those compromises will lead to a more ideologically consistent United States, a more trusted United States, and a United States that will be more respected on the international level and allows us to be a better world leader. One of Ukraine's former ambassadors, the ambassador to Austria, responded to her statement by saying, "One of the people who make up all kinds of crazy stuff just to be able to righteously look away during a real genocide. Greetings from the bombarded Kiev, you reptile." You reptile. My God. This guy right here, he is the former ambassador to Austria. He was during Poroshenko and I think early Zelensky, he was the ambassador. He is a troublemaker. And when I say he's a troublemaker, he's the one who I think responded to Elon Musk and said like, "Fuck you, Elon." Like he's a troublemaker. Her response to this was, "This is Ukraine's former ambassador to Austria. I'm more inclined to credit the humanitarian motives of those who don't jump to calling women reptiles when they disagree." Look, he insulted you. And you can be like, I'm more inclined to credit humanitarian motives to those who don't insult me. But what does this have to do with her being a woman? Is reptile like a sexism thing? I think both men and women can be reptiles, right? Well, I mean, technically no one can because it's an animal. It's like a type of animal, not a human being, for God's sakes. But I don't think it's a gender exclusive insult. He didn't like call her like a bitch or something. He said you were a reptile, not a... I don't understand like where the woman part comes in. Is like the idea of insulting a woman, like, is that enough for you to be like if I said you're stupid, would it be Briahna Joy Gray responding saying, which I'm not calling her stupid, by the way. I'm just saying, like, let's say I called her stupid. Would the response be, wow, maybe we would support Ukraine more if you guys didn't call women stupid? Like, you're putting that there to make it sound like it was sexist. Like, she's putting this there purposely to try to be like, haha, sexism, because I am a woman who was called the reptile. Like, this just like comes off as like, honestly, whiny and less like a legitimate response. I'm more inclined to credit the humanitarian motives of those who don't jump to calling women reptiles when they disagree. Is it very that okay, I will say, like, the guy insulted her, so she's like, okay, she's understandable to be outraged by that. But one, it's not sexist to insult you. It's just an insult. And two, are you really that surprised that somebody in Kiev who has to live with these drones tearing apart their community every day and has lost who knows how many friends and family to this war might be a little angry in response to the video you posted? Like, is it really that difficult to understand that maybe he does have humanitarian motives, but when you're gonna come out and be like, hey, well, why are we supporting Ukraine and not invading China, that he might be so taken aback by how ridiculous that statement is that he might, you know, let it loose a little bit when it comes to insults? My goodness. Then Joe responded to this, the person in the question, the person who's in the interview here, and he said, I've done lots of interviews on the right and left. Never has the host weaponized the interview to attack me and encourage your supporters to post hundreds of insults and smears without correction. Don't make my mistake. Never go in bad faith pod with Joy Gray. Okay. How do I put this? He wasn't attacked in this post. He wasn't attacked, and she did not encourage her followers to harass him. I don't see that happening here. I mean, I disagree with what she's saying. I disagree very fundamentally with what she's saying, but she didn't send her followers to attack him. She didn't send her armies of trolls and goblins or whatever she has at her disposal, apparently, to attack this guy. I think he probably just got ratioed after this was posted. I don't think this was an attack. I don't think this was an attack. At least this clip, 100%. Maybe there's something else I'm not seeing, but I think Joe's having an overreaction. And with that, now that I've criticized Joe as well, now I am the unbiased centrist, the person who just floats above everything and can now not be criticized. Brilliant, brilliant.